I want to talk about something that you've probably never thought about, but matters a lot, and about how you understand how the internet works and how other people use the internet. I'm also going to put some things into perspective about how generations work and how algorithms work, because you cannot fully understand the work that we do on the internet as creators until you understand how the algorithms are designed to work. First, let's talk about this generation chart. This chart shows every generation from Gen Alpha and Gen Z. This is probably most of you. Millennials, which is me. Gen X, the boomers, the greatest generation, the silent generation, and the lost generation. Now, thinking about it this way, prior to the lost generation, 1883 to 1900, this would have been people who fought in the Civil War, right? So before this would have been the generation that fought in the Civil War. After that was the lost generation. And then we have the greatest in the GI generation. This is a group of people in the greatest in the GI generation that fought in World War I and World War II, by and large, because those folks came out and had children who were the baby boomers. Now, this is where things start to get interesting. The baby boomers were the result of a massive influx of soldiers who came back from the European and Japanese theaters in World War II and began having families. They had delayed a lot of this, and so there was a lot of, I guess, what we'll consider pent-up demand. And so they had the baby boomer generation. The baby boomers consist of my parents, and so I'm here as a millennial. I was born in 1987, so kind of on the middle spot of the millennial generation. The baby boomers are my parents. They're probably your grandparents. Generation X, which could also be partially your grandparents, were the children of the baby boomers, and as well as the millennials. Now, Zoomers and Generation Z, this is most of you, and Generation Alpha is the generation that's coming after you. These are people who are probably today in like middle and high school. We don't have a name yet for the next generation, but it'll probably be something that goes with the alphabetical order of B from the Greek mythology. So it'll probably be something like Generation Beta, for example. What does this have to do with anything? Well, think about it this way. The people who, starting with just the baby boomers as one example, the baby boomers are still working. Baby boomers who were born in the 1960s are themselves today the people who are nearing retirement today. These are 60, 70-ish year old people. There are still people working in the workplace who are 60 and 70 years old. These are board presidents. These are presidents and CEOs. These are executives. These are people who have spent their careers working in a specific place or an industry and are now mostly in control. Generation X, these people are mostly in their 40s and 50s today. This, again, is a group of people who have as much as 20 or 30 more years ahead of them in the workplace or leading generational initiatives like community groups, government, all sorts of committees that they can serve in that give them a sense of control and power over certain organizations and their money. Millennials, which includes me, are mostly in their 30s and 40s today. This is a group of people who are finally becoming financially secure, as most people traditionally do, by the time they reach their 30s and 40s. Because by this point, when you reach your 30s and 40s, you've generally had enough work experience that you can command a stable salary, but you're starting to raise families. Maybe you've already had kids and they're young, or maybe elementary school age. And then you get to Generation Z, which is where you are, and you have college-age kids, and you have some high school students, but mostly at this point, these are people who are in their 20s today. And when you're at this stage of your life in Generation Z, things look a lot different than the people who are the baby boomers. Imagine for a second that you could walk into a room where people from your generation, the millennials, Gen X, and a boomer generation could all be sitting in the same room. How do these people interact with the technology that's around them? Here's why I'm saying all of this. It is very common for people at any age to assume that the stuff that is very familiar and comfortable for you is the norm. It's thinking that the stuff that you watched on television as a child is the stuff that everyone is familiar with. The stuff, the toys that you played with, the video games that you played, the movies that you watched, the culture that you've experienced, the music that you listen to. It's very easy for people to assume that what they grew up with or what they are interested in now is something that everyone is either aware of or likes or enjoys just as much. Or for the matter, the things that they don't like are also the same things that everyone else doesn't like. I have come to learn somewhat the hard way that is just absolutely not the case. And here's an example. I'm going to show you what is currently live in my Facebook feed. Okay? You log into Facebook, you get something that looks kind of like this, right? Now, I'm aware that as a Gen Z member, you probably don't even have a Facebook page, or if you do, you probably don't look at it that much. I don't look at mine that much either. But Facebook is sort of the default social media for a significant number of people. In fact, it is the default social media for boomers, Gen X, and for a lot of millennials. Because for millennials, Facebook was what came out when we were in college. I was your age when Facebook started to grow its audience. Now, think about this for a second. Baby boomers could potentially have been alive and have memory. They could remember a time when they used to use an outhouse. I'm not kidding about this. My dad is a baby boomer. He grew up in a rural part of southern Indiana, and his grandparents had an outhouse. He remembers using an outhouse. He went to school in one of the last generation of one-room schools. Think about that for a second. The amount of stuff that somebody in this generation has seen. Their parents would have given them extremely vivid memories of the Depression. They would have been sort of formed. They would have formed their opinions of the economy, about how money works, based off of their parents' experience in some way, based off of the Depression. When you think about Generation X, this is a group born between 1965 and 1980. They have experienced, think about all of the different presidential elections that they've experienced. And this was a generation that grew up without the internet. Millennials, my generation, I can still remember using shared party line telephones. Televisions were made of wood, and I can remember a childhood when I did not have the internet. I didn't really have internet access in my home until I was in middle school. And so when you come to your generation, which could be described as the first fully native digital generation in history, although a lot of people ascribe that to millennials, I think that a lot of millennials still remember a time before internet access, and certainly before cell phones, because cell phones didn't really come into their own until the iPhone came out in 2007, which was smack in the middle of your generation. Facebook is the default social media platform for most of those people, and for most all of those generations of people, most of whom have lots of money, have lots of power, and have lots of control. Facebook is the default social media. They potentially tried others like Instagram or Twitter, which is now X, and may or may not have stuck with those, but for most people of that generation, Facebook is their platform. LinkedIn is also up there because it sort of came along later, but it has that sort of professional panache to it. But it's a different sort of audience and style to it. But when we look at Facebook, you get stuff like, okay, here's somebody that I know him, but I don't know him. I have an ad for flooring, apparently. I have reels and short videos from people I don't know. People I might know. I don't know any of those people. I have this funny jokes group that I've never interacted with and have never seen before. I have a person who I do know, but I don't know extremely well. I have another ad, this time for milk. And then I have one of these memory things. I have a photo from my sister-in-law. And then I have some more photos, and then I have more reels, and I have another ad. What do we start to notice through here? here's what you start to notice. Let's just scroll back up on this. This is a legitimate piece of material, right? This is legitimate content, I guess what we'll call it. But I have an ad. I have Facebook recommended material, which is kind of an ad. I have people I might know, which is Facebook suggesting more stuff to me, so that's kind of an ad. I have a group that's suggesting that I join, which is a more Facebook advertisement in sort of its own way. So of the first 4 posts, 4 things that I see are ads. They're algorithmically inserted into my feed. Now, all the social media networks have switched to this process, right? Where they spend most of their time showing you algorithmically sorted material. Facebook was first to this, and this is important to understand historically. Facebook was first to this, and they were first to 2 things. First, to what we call the social graph, which is that we can connect people with other people that they know. And so this is them with this people that I might know section, trying to suggest other people to help grow my social graph. And they were first to an algorithmic timeline, because initially Facebook just showed you a chronological order, very similar to how like a website blog might work, where they would just sort of tack the posts in sequentially. All fine and well until most people's social graphs got so large that they could no longer manage to sort of sift through all the stuff. The big change came when Facebook went public. Once they went public and they started to care a lot more about their stock valuation, they needed a way to increase the amount of time that people spent on their platform. And so one of the ways that they do this is they sort of sift through and remove all of the stuff that people aren't engaging with. And by engaging, I mean they don't like, they don't comment, they don't share, or they don't otherwise look at it for very long. They started removing or hiding some of that, suppressing some of that material, and only showing people more of what it seems like they were already engaging with. Now, I've never engaged with this particular group or any other sort of cartoon, but the fact that I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it on my screen for this amount of time is being recorded by Facebook. Facebook knows that I am looking at this material. They certainly know this as well from within the app. This is the foundation from which a lot of other social media has grown. X now does very much the same thing. Certainly TikTok is completely algorithmically generated. TikTok was the first social media channel that completely did away with the notion of the social graph entirely and just sort of decided to show you things that were of interest to you based off of what you were already looking at, how long you were looking at, and so forth. And so they just took that the next step further. Why am I saying all of this? Well, because when people start to think about how do we interact with people on the internet, you come back to this generational chart of the boomers and the Gen X almost exclusively. I can assure you that there is no other conversation being had in most organizations and in most small organizations, at least, but in most rooms, about how to market something. Like, we're having an event. We're going to start a fundraiser. We have a new product to launch. We have a new service. We're a new roofing company. Whatever that might be. I can assure you that when they're talking about we need to blast this on social media, what they want is Facebook. Okay? Now, that's going to change because the boomers will eventually die off as time immemorial. And once they do, Gen X will be here and the millennials will be here. But see, here's the thing that you, as a Gen Z person, have to understand. Just as I have had to deal with people in my career who are boomers and Gen X, you're going to have to contend with millennials and Gen X for a long time. I'm 37 years old, which means that I've probably got another like 30, 40 years in me of workplace momentum, right? My generation is going to be around for another 30 or 40 years. If you're about 20 years old today, that means that you'll be about 60 by the time you reach this point where the boomers are today. You'll be about 60 years old before you will finally be sort of at the top of the chain in terms of command about, you know, what your money is spent on and how your culture sort of influences the rest of society. Because currently, there are so many boomers that despite the fact that they are dying, and they are dying rapidly at this point, they still command a large share of our culture. They command a large share of our electorate because they vote. And they command a large share of our culture in terms of how we reach people and how we communicate. Now, your assignment that you will be doing this week and for many other weeks in this course is going to revolve around how do we develop a content strategy? How do we reach people on the internet? You have to recognize that the knee-jerk reaction that most young people have, and I had the same reaction as well, is, well, we just put this thing on the internet. We put this thing on whatever the channel or the medium is that is most interesting to you. And that will work eventually. Okay? But it might take years. It may never happen because other things may come along that may disrupt some of this stuff. Because if you were a baby boomer or Gen X, you lived almost most of your life, certainly all of your childhood and most of your adult formative years, without ever picking up a phone. And now everybody has a phone. Even boomers of that generation have phones, smartphones. As you start thinking about what it is that you are going to do for future assignments and how you develop content strategy, remember that generationally, you are pretty young and that there aren't that many of you, and that of those that there are, you right now watching this are amongst the bleeding edge of that generation. And because of that, there's a number of people who are still behind you who, like you at this point, if you're around your 20 years old, don't command a large share of the commerce of this country, right? Because if you're offering a new service or you're offering a new donation campaign or whatever it might be, you want people who can afford to hire you. Think about it this way. If you were starting a roofing company, who would you target for new roofs? Who would you want to tell that you are a new roofing company? Well, you'd want people who own roofs. Who owns roofs? People who own houses. Who owns houses? Generally, at this point, older people, because most 20-something-year-old people haven't yet bought a house. And so if you were operating a new roofing company and you came in and as a strategy and you said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new TikTok account. It's probably not going to get very far because A, who kind of wants to see that and how would you frame that? And B, those people don't own houses yet by and large. However, that will shift at some point. And so you could make an argument to say, okay, well, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we are in a position that as Gen Z begins to purchase houses, that we have material in a channel that's already established that's interesting to them, that would encourage them to subscribe and, hire us to do new roofs. But that might be a hard sell for somebody because for most people, most businesses, they probably want somebody who can look at them right now and say, here's how we're going to get you some sales, and here's how we're going to start that tomorrow. And there are a bunch of ways that we can do that, and we will talk about them in this class over this semester. But for now, you have an assignment coming up that's going to ask that you promote an upcoming event. And you're probably going to have to lean heavily into Facebook. And when you lean into Facebook, you need to think about the fact that Facebook has certain prescribed sizes for things. Facebook also has an algorithm to their feed about how they show what they show to people. For example, they want to show people things that keep them on Facebook. It's the same tactic that every social media channel does, including YouTube. Whatever allows people to spend more time on that channel is going to win in that algorithm. As one example of this, it's why when you paste a YouTube URL into Facebook, it does not go as far. Because Facebook does not want you to leave Facebook to go to YouTube. They want you to stay on Facebook. And so if you upload the video directly to Facebook, you end up getting a little bit better reach than if you just upload it to YouTube and then link to it. Does that mean you only put the video on one spot? No, of course not. You probably need to put the video on both channels. But that's one of the factors that they look for. Another factor that they look for is that they want photos that are attractive, to say nothing of the least. Part of that means that it's ads and text-free material. Facebook has long had a rule that they don't want images in their timeline that has lots of text written on them. And so one of the things that you encounter, and some of the examples that you will see that I've included in this week's Canvas page, is people very frequently like to create little event flyers that they then stick onto Facebook that has all of this information. It's sort of take what you would imagine a print flyer to be, and then just convert it into a JPEG and put it on the web. And when they put it onto Facebook, Facebook's systems analyze that, and they compare with what's called the 20% rule. The 20% rule means that if you were to divide the image into a little checkboard pattern, and that if a piece of text or a character of text or a number were to overlap in over 20% of the squares in that image, then it's going to suppress that image. And it does that because it does not want there to be lots of boring bits of text, I guess. Facebook has long had this rule. They've had this rule for probably 15 years now. This is going to be a challenge for about how you approach these things. How do you create what I like to call something that's thumb stopping? So that way when you're on your phone and you're scrolling through, you get to something that's like, wait, what was that? And you stop scrolling with your thumb. How do you create something that is thumb stopping, that gets a person to go, wait, what was that? And they come back up and they look at something and then they decide to click on it. Because if you scroll through these things and you don't actually click on any of these things, like this ad for Dove up here, if I didn't stop to click on it, then it was a failure. It failed. It just didn't work. The whole point of all of this advertising is so that it's targeted, right? That it's something that people decide that they need in some fashion that is applicable to them. I guess the algorithm thinks that I need deodorant, I guess. But if it doesn't entice a person to click, then what's the point? So think about that as you think about this week's assignment. I'm going to put some more information in the page. I encourage you to read that, to start thinking about how a lot of these things work, about how the aesthetic of a lot of these things work, about how the algorithms of a lot of these things work. And then we'll bounce some things back and forth, and we'll discover more about how whatever the material that you create can fit within all the right different channels for all the right different audiences.